And I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. That's Eric Elgin from MSU Extension.
Thank you very much. Well, yeah, what a fun beginning to look at the polls and those questions. I am grateful to be here tonight. It's always fun to be part of a webinar that's called The Power of Plants. And so I'm going to get things started. Again, my name is Eric Elgin. I'm an aquatic ecologist with Michigan State University Extension. I do a lot of work in the conservation of our inland lakes. And tonight I'm going to talk about one of my passions, which are aquatic plants. Note in here, I say my title is Life in the Weeds. And I have weeds in quotes because oftentimes when we see these plants in the water, the first thing we say is, oh, look at that seaweed, or gross, it's touching me while I swim. But by the end of my 15 minutes here, I hope to show you that these weeds in the water have many benefits that structure a lot of what we enjoy in our inland lakes. So what do I mean for aquatic plants in my presentation? So what I'm referring to here are submersed aquatic plants. So here's a cross section of a typical deep lake, a lake over 30 feet deep, let's say. As you all are probably familiar, is that we see a lot of plants in the shallow areas. And that's because what's happening is as sunlight comes down into a lake, it starts to get reflected, absorbed, and so on. And so there's an extent where the light goes away. There's not enough light for photosynthesis. And so that area where there is enough light, we call the photic zone. So there's enough light for photosynthesis to occur. When that photic zone intersects and touches the bottom of the lake, rooted aquatic plants can grow because sunlight is reaching the bottom sediments. And we call that area the littoral zone. And so my presentation is going to be focusing on this area of the lake called the littoral zone. So this is a typical deep water lake, but the more common lake type around the world is actually a shallow lake. And shallow lakes, oftentimes the photic zone is found that goes all the way to the bottom of the lake throughout pretty much the entire basin of the lake. And so in these lakes, you get even more aquatic plants. And then therefore, many of the things that plants do are magnified in these shallower systems. And what is a shallow lake? If the mean depth is under 15 feet or so, that's pretty much what that's how we can define a shallow lake. And this area of a lake is truly an underwater forest. It has incredible diversity. It has towering pondweed species that are canopy formers that can grow many feet up into the water column. They have more low-growing carpet type species and species in between. I just put in a few little tidbits here. People may be familiar with the word milfoil, and oftentimes it's seen as a negative, mainly because there is a species of milfoil called Eurasian water milfoil that is invasive and non-native. It's non-native and causes impacts on our lake, so it's invasive. But there are 6 other native milfoil species in Michigan. We have awesome carnivorous submersed plants. So these are plants that are under the water, but have these little bladders where a little invertebrate swims by and it opens and closes and slowly dissolves it and eats it. So it's a really cool glimpse. I really encourage any of you to put on a snorkel mask and take a swim through the underwater forest, or a hike through the underwater forest. It's not just that they have really cool diversity and they're neat amongst themselves, they also provide incredible value to fish and other wildlife, all sorts of different species. For example, for fish, some fish might spawn on them. Some fish might, when they hatch from their eggs, those little baby fish might swim amongst the aquatic plants as a refuge from getting eaten. Whereas some will actually, adult fish will, like northern pike, will utilize it for hunting, where they will wiggle into plant beds, reaching out to grab their prey. There's also other uh, ways that plants provide wonderful habitat is that they allow for certain types of attached algae to grow on these plants. And because of that, you get a tremendous amount of invertebrates that eat that algae on the surface of the plants. And then that is a linkage into the broader food web of the lake. So they're just incredibly important for habitat for a variety of organisms in a lake. But I'm going to shift my presentation now to talk more about their structuring role in providing good water clarity and water quality. And so there's a few bullet points here where aquatic plants have a host of mechanisms that they do that improve water clarity, from reducing sediment resuspension, increasing sedimentation, reducing shoreline erosion, competing with those nutrients that are found in the water column, shading out and creating areas where they grow best. They also can produce chemicals that go up into the water and inhibit the growth of algae. Um, and largely, why would that be the case? Is they're in competition with algae for light and nutrients. And because phytoplankton, the microscopic algae that can float into the water, they can be up and about and shade out the aquatic plants. And so these aquatic plants and algae are in competition with one another for those things. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about how aquatic plants are a refuge for zooplankton and specifically certain zooplankton that are filter feeders that help reduce algae in the water column. So I'm going to dive into these quick. So what do I mean by sediment resuspension and sedimentation? So imagine we're looking at a lake. So here's the surface of a lake. Here's the bottom in the lake bed here. When wind is moving across the surface of the lake, there is a transfer of energy of that wind into the water column. And if it's in shallow area and there's a big enough wind, that energy can touch the bottom of the lake. When it does that, it can cause sediment resuspension. So now sediment is resuspended up into the water column, which in just in that is inherently reducing water clarity. But then also those sediment particles, what's oftentimes attached to those sediment particles is phosphorus. And phosphorus is a key nutrient to algae and plant growth. And when it's bound to sediment, it's not utilized by those algae. But now when that sediment particle gets released or gets resuspended up into the water column, it releases from the sediment. The phosphorus releases from the sediment and is now available for use by algae, which is reducing water clarity further. Now, I'm going to keep this same graph, but we're going to look at it when there's aquatic plants present. So now we have waves going across, but instead of that wave energy reaching the bottom of the lake, what we're seeing here is that the aquatic plants are absorbing that wave energy, buffering the sediment, kind of carpeting it, keeping it in place. And so now there's not enough wind energy reaching the lake bed. And so now sediment resuspension is very minimal. And so you're not getting that release of particles up into the water column, and you're not getting as much phosphorus release either. And not only is it reducing sediment resuspension, it's also causing this wave energy because it absorbs some of that wave energy. It creates zones of lower energy. So now if there is particles and algae, clay particles, organic particles floating in the water column, it actually, if it goes into a plant bed, it can go into these kind of zones of low energy and particles start to fall out. And you can see this in big lakes where there's big aquatic plant beds. It might be kind of turbid and cloudy out in the middle and off to the side. But then when you get into these large plant beds, it can clear up considerably because all these particles are falling down into the plant bed. And so now it's reducing sediment resuspension and increasing sedimentation, which both mechanisms improve water clarity in lakes. There's a cool study that looked at this. And so what we see here is on a lake where there was no plants, as wind speed increases, we see more phosphorus releasing into the water column. When we have plants that are present throughout this lake, even though there's higher wind, there's not as much, there's the phosphorus really doesn't change. And so we're seeing that effect of keeping resuspension down. Another mechanism that we look at is nutrient competition. So nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients are really important for both phytoplankton algae and aquatic plants. And so we oftentimes will see in these very dense plant beds, well, these plants can absorb and utilize and then hold on to these nutrients throughout the growing season. Plant beds can also create chemical conditions that actually can release nitrogen from the water column and up into the air as N2 gas. And so an experiment was done among many different projects where they looked at algae growth here, and then they looked at just looking at a bottle that had nutrients and algae, and this is called a control. They put in plastic plants to see if it was all about structure, and then they added Cara, which is a common aquatic plant in Michigan. Myriophyllum is a milfoil, and Elodea is called waterweed. And what we see here is in all three circumstances, when aquatic plants are present, we have less algal growth. And so what they were showing here is that, without any sediment resuspension or anything like that, aquatic plants were inhibiting the growth of algae. And when they studied it further, it was through absorbing nutrients and holding it. And then also they were seeing a little bit of evidence where chemicals were being released into the water column, inhibiting the growth. And that's called alleopathy. And then my final mechanism I wanted to talk about was that aquatic plants are a daytime refuge for filter feeding zooplankton. So these critters over here filter feed the water and eat a bunch of algae, but they also are eaten by fish. And so to stay away from fish during the day, they swim into the aquatic plants as a refuge. They filter feed during the day, creating clear conditions. But then when night comes, they go back into the open water and filter feed there as well. And so we're seeing this cool effect where the food web is now affected with aquatic plants through the zooplankton, which is pretty incredible. And so all of these mechanisms, plus more, are working at the same time in our lakes. And so when we see an abundance of aquatic plants, especially in shallow lakes, we are having these clear water conditions. But if plants are reduced into a certain threshold, the lake can flip and become more algae dominated and very cloudy and turbid. And this is a challenge because when we live on lakes, oftentimes we reduce the aquatic plant abundance and biomass in that littoral zone. And oftentimes it's because of this perception that weeds are nuisance. There are weeds in the water and we don't like them. And because of this perceived nuisance, plants are removed. And we see this in the different studies around where they look at developed shorelines and undeveloped shorelines. And what we find is aquatic plants are reduced when it's developed. And as you can see, that can impact many things in the lake. It's not just reduction of plants, it's now having cascading impacts to water clarity, quality, and habitat. And so to finish my presentation, it's to note that these aquatic plants, most of them are not weeds. Many of them are wonderful. They're cool in their own right, but they also do many wonderful things that benefit wildlife, fish, other organisms, and the water quality of our lakes. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.